Hi there, history fans. So today we have a video about a resistance group in Europe during the Second World War, which I think isn't that much mainstream, like in world history, especially outside of Europe. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they are, I think, mostly overlooked. So the Yugoslav Partisan movement. And the video is called "Why Were the Yugoslav Partisans So Effective?" And it's from History Matters. It's a great channel. They make, like short 3, 4, 5 minute clips. And this was actually a Discord suggestion, so by our Discord members. So I'm pretty excited to cover a first video from History Matters. The original link is going to be in the description below. Give them a view and a like. Check out their channel if you don't know them. And as a Croat, I think I can give some thoughts, opinions, and so on. Additional information. But keep in mind, that I'm a Croat. So I don't know if I'm going to be, completely neutral, or if I can be completely neutral, because throughout my whole education, almost my whole education was inside of Croatia, so one of the ex-Yugoslav states. So, let's jump into the video. As always, if you want to correct me, add something interesting, just let me know in the comment section below.
During the Second World War, there were many resistance movements across Europe who refused to accept their country's occupations.
Yep.
The most famous is, of course, the French resistance, but one resistance movement which doesn't get too much attention is the Yugoslav one. It was a movement which fought for Yugoslav independence and inflicted major damage on their occupiers. Yugoslavia was also one of the only nations in the war to mostly liberate themselves. This raises the question, why...
Mostly, yeah, mostly they liberated themselves.
Mostly liberate themselves.
Here he says mostly, but the Red Army helped. Yeah, when the Red Army pushed back the Germans after the Battle of Stalingrad, they went through different countries, Romania, Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, and so on. And they actually instated their, puppet governments and so on. But then comes the question, if the Red Army helped Yugoslavia, why couldn't they install, their puppet state? There were two actual things. So the leader of the partisan movement was actually Josip Broz Tito, and he was called the Stalin of the Balkan, or the best student of Stalin. So Stalin himself actually trusted that Tito after the war would be under his boots. The second thing is the Red Army went only through this territory, so today's Vojvodina in Serbia, and a small part in Croatia called Baranja, and then they went up to Hungary and Budapest and so on. And people inside of Yugoslavia, because of that, they mostly contributed, the fighting against the Germans and don't forget the Italians on the Croatian coast and Slovenian coast. They mostly contributed, the liberation and so on to the Yugoslav Partisans and not the Red Army. So Tito had the only legitimacy inside of the common people, of course, pushed with also the so-called agitprop, so agitation and propaganda, which was a unit inside of the partisan movement. But yeah, mostly, 99% of the land was liberated by them.
This raises the question, why were they so effective? In a twist of events, the Yugoslav resistance was fractured, and so to get a better view of things, some backstory is necessary.
I'm already interested in the comment section, from especially people from ex-Yugoslav countries. They're going to be like, no, you're wrong on this, you're wrong on this, blah, blah, blah. History, a lot of the history is also perspective, so keep that in mind.
By the time the war started, Yugoslavia was a relatively new country, having been created after World War I and the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a multi-ethnic kingdom whose government was, for the most part, dominated by Serbians, who were the largest ethnic group. Ethnic tensions were a grave concern to the ruling government and the monarch, King Peter II, who wasn't of age yet, and so Yugoslavia was governed by a regent, Prince Paul. Paul was growing ever more concerned about Germany, and particularly Italy.
Okay, so after the First World War, Italy, with the treaties, was set to gain, these islands on the coastline of today's Croatia. Inside of the Habsburg monarchy, which was on the losing side, you had Slovenes, Croats, and parts of Serbia, today's Serbia, and also Bosnia. So after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the state of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs was established, and then because Italians pushed with their army into Dalmatia, into the coastline, they were like, oh my god, we don't have a regular army. We need to join with Serbia as fast as possible because Serbia is on the winning side, or was on the winning side in the First World War. Plus they have a, regular standing army, and they can help us with Italy. So those states pushed even more and more, or as fast as they could, to unification with Serbia. But you had dissident voices, especially in the Croatian camp, with one of the leaders called Stjepan Radic. But he was later assassinated in the Belgrade parliament.
Who had designs on Yugoslavian land and also had just eaten Albania. Paul wanted to stay neutral and protect Yugoslavian independence, but his government was largely pro-ally. By early 1941, the Allies weren't exactly doing well, and so Paul agreed to sign the Tripartite Pact, but as a neutral nation.
True.
The Yugoslav people and many in the military were fiercely anti-German, and so this action was followed by protests, and in late March, Paul was ousted in a coup. This coup placed Peter in charge with an even more pro-British government, and roughly 2 weeks later, the Axis invaded and swiftly conquered the country. It was then divided between the Axis powers like this. This part here was called the independent state of Croatia because it was a puppet state run by Croats. In fact, it was run by a fascist group called the Ustaše, who promptly carried out ethnic cleansing.
Okay, the thing is, there was a coup, and they still they supported the Allies, especially the British and the French. But you also need to take into account the ex-lands that were part of Austria-Hungary, because they went through, they still had, let's call it, trauma from that time period with the Hungarization and Germanization that Austria pushed on their lands. And then, approximately 20 years later, it's not even a whole generation later, Germans come and say, hey, we're going to, you're going to be subject to us and so on. So a lot of people felt direct resentment because also of the historical remedy that the Austrian-Hungarian Empire left to those states, especially, in Croatian lands, but also Bosnia. Bosnia was a big player in that sentiment. And the Germans installed the independent state of Croatia, which was run by a fascist group called the Ustaša, and they did big atrocities, especially to Jews, Serbs, and Roma people. And the biggest camp is in today's region here somewhere, approximately in today's region called Slavonia, and it's called Jasenovac. Look it up.
By Croats. In fact, it was run by a fascist group called the Ustaše, who promptly carried out ethnic cleansing in its new territories. Whilst the country itself had formally surrendered, this didn't mean that everyone who lived there accepted it. So there were two main groups of resistors. The first were the Chetniks, which was a Serbian royalist movement led by Draža Mihailović. The second were the most famous, the Partisans, who were a multi-ethnic communist movement led by Josip Broz Tito, which was founded after Germany invaded the USSR. At first, the two groups worked together to sabotage the Axis, but ideological differences eroded away any trust that they had. The Chetniks, who were basically the remnants of the Yugoslav army, took the role of selective collaboration, and their plan was to wait for the Allies to come to their aid. This led to them simply waiting for the Axis to leave, and given their hostility...
Oh my god, he speaks so fast. Okay, so now bear with me. Yeah, there were two main resistance groups. So you had the Partisans, which was a multi-ethnical movement. So you had Croats, but mostly Serbs were at the beginning. Mostly Serbs were inside of the partisan movement, but you had also Slovenes, Croats, Macedonians, Muslims, Bosniaks, Bosnians, whatever you want to call, people. But the Serbian Chetnik movement was mostly, made out of ethnically Serbs, and the Chetniks, as he is saying, the Chetniks eventually started to collaborate with especially Italians and also later on Germans to sabotage the partisan movement. And that is one of the main things what drives the Allies to eventually accept the partisan movement as the legitimate resistance movement against the Axis powers. And Chetniks did atrocities, especially against Muslims in Bosnia and Croats in Bosnia, but the partisans did also atrocities, not only on Croats, and they were multi-ethnical, and they also did atrocities to every ethnicity practically. Okay. I think I kind of explained it a little bit.
Was to wait for the Allies to come to their aid. This led to them simply waiting for the Axis to leave, and given their hostility to the Communists, saw them eventually receive material aid from Italy. As for the Communist Partisans, they'd have sooner died than collaborate, and were based around a core of veterans from the Spanish Civil War. They conducted sabotage, raided supplies, attacked soldiers, and routinely liberated areas from the Axis. In fact, the partisans were such a problem that the Axis had to maintain over 100,000 soldiers in Yugoslavia to deal with them. Resistance continued to grow throughout the war, and in 1943 the Allies recognised the partisans as the legitimate resistance and not the Chetniks. By this point, the partisans had over
so mostly the partisans fought in a guerrilla warfare, which they, as he said, brought back with their experience in the Spanish Civil War. But it had a big toll and a big cost on this costs on the civilian population. So if there was one German soldier killed, by partisans, 100 civilians were executed because of that. If one German soldier was wounded, then 50 civilians would be executed. And look up Kragujevac. That's a city in Serbia, and look what the Germans did there. Pretty horrific story. Just check it out. Kragujevac, Serbia.
250,000 people in its service. One reason for this was that it was a Yugoslav movement, not a Serbian one, and also because Tito gave amnesty several times to those who had supported the Chetniks or the Axis, which boosted the partisans greatly. And this is ultimately what led to their success. The people of Yugoslavia had disliked the Germans and the ruling Serbian classes before the war, and the Yugoslav communists were neither. Tito was a clever...
And they were pretty, as I said, there was a special unit called Agitprop, agitation and propaganda, and they were pretty effective. Whatever you think about the partisans, positive, negative, they were pretty effective, because the main slogan of the partisans was, brotherhood and unity, peace, let's all work together. When we establish Yugoslavia, it's going to be a unity, a federate state where all the nations will be equal and so on, because they didn't want the Croats and the Slovenes to feel, the Serbs are, after the war, the Serbs are, going to gain the power as they had prior to the war inside of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So they were pretty effective, and a fun fact, they actually went outside, they were not talking about communism, they were led by the Communist Party of Yugoslavia and Josip Broz Tito, but they went on to propagate that they're a so-called national front, Narodna fronta. So, you didn't join the communists to fight, you joined the national front to fight. So, there were also some, let's call it sleazy tactics from them, but clever ones. Okay.
Ruling Serbian classes before the war, and the Yugoslav communists were neither. Tito was a clever leader who knew how to get people on board with a unified vision of the future. They were also based in the mountainous regions of Yugoslavia, from which they were extremely hard to dislodge.
Bosnia. Main center of the resistance was Bosnia, because, as he said, mountains, and there's also a popular partisan song called Po šumama I gorama, through the woods and the mountains. So, yeah.
And it was all of these things combined which made them so effective, and ultimately led to Yugoslavia being a constant thorn in the Axis side. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Let's just see this. Yeah, as I said, unifying vision. As I said, he didn't want to he was just saying, you know, like all the ethnicities inside of the new state are going to be equal. Mountains, yeah, because of the terrain, you know, like guerrilla warfare, especially inside of Bosnia, but also other mountainous terrains inside of, you know, like in the back of Dalmatia and also in Serbia and so on. Granting amnesty, yeah, a lot of, as the war progressed and the Allies pushed more and more, and you know, like Germany started to break, and especially when the Soviets pushed from the east, a lot of the Chetniks and different resistance groups and so on just flocked into the partisans to, you know, like to gain amnesty and so on. Good leadership, I would say, yeah, good leadership. I mean, clever leadership. Allied support, yeah. Allies also helped them with weaponry that they would embark on the Adriatic coast. Yugoslavian, yeah, I agree.
Ultimately led to Yugoslavia being a constant thorn in the Axis side. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you for watching, with extra thanks to my Patreon supporters, which you can see on screen.
Patrons.
And with an extra special thanks to James Bisonet, David Archaeologist,
I'm gonna make it a little bit.
Rob Waterhouse, Chris Wicker, Michael Reynolds, Gustav Swan, David Silverman,
So, don't get me wrong,
Christian Cheke, Anthony.
they also did atrocities, and a lot of the atrocities that they did was mostly covered up after the Second World, because, you know, like a communist / socialist, Titoist, whatever you want to call it, nation was created, so communist Yugoslavia, and a lot, you know, like, and the period was until the 90s, so there was a whole generation that went through, you know, like, also, I would say partially indoctrination and everything which comes with a centralized power. But yeah, a lot of the atrocities that the partisans did wasn't talked that much before, but now people are trying to uncover it. There are a lot of, you know, like mass graves and holes in Slovenia and also in Western Croatia that are only now discovered. But they were a pretty effective force, and as you can see, in that small territory, the Germans needed to hold throughout the whole war approximately 100 soldiers in that region. One thing that I would also like to mention is also the Germans, ethnically Germans who lived in Yugoslavia, which were called Volksdeutsche. They were Germans who lived there for centuries, so they weren't like, hey, Second World War, we crushed Germany, let's move to Yugoslavia. They lived at the Danube River, and they were called Danube Swabians. Some of them joined the partisan movement. Look up the Ernst Thälmann division. It's a pretty interesting stuff, where ethnic Yugoslav Germans joined the partisans to fight Germans in Yugoslavia. It's a pretty crazy story. But yeah, after the war, a lot, like 90% of the Danube Swabes were expelled from Yugoslavia, and I think approximately 500,000 people, if I'm correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. And they were expelled to Germany and Austria, which is a pretty crazy thing. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed it. Oh my god, the comment section. And of course the like and dislike ratio. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you get notified when new videos come out. If you want to join Patreon, the link is in the description below. If you want to join Discord, the link is also in the description below. And don't forget to give History Matters a view and a like. Peace out. Ciao.